Good evening and welcome to Viewpoint. When he made a discussion possible between Pope Francis and President Obama, with his instantaneous translation between English and Spanish, it was clear Mark Miles was a person of exceptional talent. Now Monsignor Miles is to be promoted to and ordained as Archbishop here in Gibraltar. He'll be the first Gibraltarian to hold the rank of nuncio. He's also the first Archbishop to come from the active clergy in the Gibraltar Diocese. 800 guests will attend the event at the Europa Sports Hall. It'll be broadcast live on GBC television at 4:30 p.m. on Sunday. A number of VIPs from the Vatican will be attending, including the Secretary of State, Cardinal Pietro Parolin, second in that organization to the Pope. Earlier this week, I met Archbishop-elect Mark Miles at St. Theresa's Church for an in-depth interview. The 53-year-old will start work early next month as an apostolic nuncio, the Pope's representative to two of the poorest countries in Africa, the republics of Benin and Togo. How does he feel about that challenge? Archbishop-elect Miles, thank you for giving us of your time. We know it's a very busy week for you. How does it feel to be back in Gibraltar?
Well, thank you for having me, first of all, Jonathan. It's very nice to be here. It's been quite overwhelming when I first heard I was going to be appointed apostolic nuncio, the reaction of Gibraltarians, but more so coming here now. People in the main street, people I don't know very well, a lot of pride, a lot of affection, and a lot of well-wishing, and I found it quite moving. So yes, it's been quite overpowering, actually. Yeah.
How are you feeling about this weekend's events?
A little bit nervous. I don't know if it's normal or not, but everything's in incredibly capable hands. All the organisers, you know, they say, Mark, keep out of it, don't get worried, everything will be all right, you know. And I feel very, very satisfied from that point of view. But just as a personal reaction to what it means to, I suppose, to represent the Pope in this way, to become a bishop, and just the spiritual side of that, what it implies, it makes me, yes, slightly fearful and also hopeful in God's help through it. Yeah.
What will the role entail?
Well, the primary role of representing the Pope and the Holy See, the primary role is to try and extend his ministry, the Pope's ministry of unity and visible unity in the Church, and to confirm the faith of the brethren, which just basically means to try and help the bishops as much as possible, to be united amongst themselves, the Church, a deeper, profound unity, and the unity between the Church, the bishops, the priests, the people, and Rome, and the Holy See, and the Holy Father. That's one of the primary roles, to deepen that sense of communion and cooperation at a deeper spiritual level, which they already have in both of these countries. So it's really a ministry of service to that, and to try and continue that, to try and encourage it. And then the secondary role, which is also important, is to try and have good relations with whichever government is in power, and to try and foster values which are common to the Holy See, to the Church, and to any government, and fostering justice, fostering peace, and what we call an integral human development, where we want to see human beings flourish in any part of the world, in that part of the world, in Africa, and what we can do as the Holy See in cooperation with governments to promote and to work together on any areas that we could. Yeah.
Of course, the countries being in West Africa, I suppose quite different to certainly Gibraltar, Rome, the Vatican, in the challenges that they face, perhaps more poverty there. Will you be based there?
Yes, I'll be based in Cotonou. It's not the, I think the capital is Porto Nuovo actually, but the capital de facto is Cotonou, and I'll be living there. And you're right to say that they're both poorer countries. The church is particularly vibrant in that area of the world, and from the little contact I've had with the nuncio and the local church, and meeting some priests from Benin and Togo, I've also been able to have an image now that it's alive. It's a church which is very much alive. Very close to the people and very close to the spiritual needs, but also material needs. The church does incredible works of charity to help people that are suffering, especially in the health sector, but also educational sector. And that's something I'm looking forward to getting to know and understand, but I believe it's something quite exciting and dynamic. Yeah.
So on the one hand, I suppose it presents particular challenges, but equally some very exciting opportunities for you.
Yes, I get the impression I'm going to learn a lot, I'm going to receive a lot, and this is what colleagues tell me who have been there previously. You fall in love with the place because the people they very much love the figure of the nuncio that comes representing the Pope, and they appreciate that encouragement. So I think I'm going to get a lot out of it, yes.
Coming at the time that it does, 1 year into the COVID-19 pandemic, I must ask you about the challenge that the pandemic poses to poorer countries like Togo, where one expects, I don't know the specific circumstances on the vaccination program in Togo, but I know that as a continent, Africa is struggling to get as many vaccines as it needs.
It is, and I think though there are incredibly good initiatives like COVAX, that's very ambitious and requires a lot of goodwill from governments and nations around the world, it is true that they are finding difficulty to get the production of the vaccines and the access to the vaccines in time. And although there are amazing efforts, I think the Holy See is trying to encourage a deeper push in that area, both at United Nations on a local level, and what they call the diplomacy of vaccines, vaccine diplomacy, to see what can be done to increase those efforts, what can be done to increase cooperation. At the present time, some vaccines are getting to various countries. I think Ghana was one of the first that received the first batches, but it is very slow and it requires much more cooperation on an international level. And as I say, the Holy See is trying to promote cross-country cooperation, so looking to its own needs, but looking to the needs beyond a particular country, especially the wealthier ones. I think in my past role in the Organization of American States, I was able to see that there is immense effort being made, but it is slightly lagging behind presently. And the Pope himself has called for just greater generosity, greater sense of fraternity and solidarity, that when we look after people who are on our borders, we are actually also looking after ourselves. So it makes sense, it's win-win to try and be generous to these other large continents that are very poor and very in suffering conditions.
Pope Francis has spoken about the pandemic shining a light on existing injustices and in some way posing a new challenge to those divides that already existed in our world between the countries that have and those that don't.
Yes.
Between people instinctively wanting to act selfishly, so in the case of the vaccine wanting to keep as many as they can for their own country, even though the particular demographic or demographics that most need protecting perhaps are already accounted for, whereas they aren't in other countries. Does the Vatican involve itself in that sort of, is that the
I think
vaccine diplomacy?
I think that the Holy See, and very much Pope Francis, when he gets the opportunity, what they're trying to do is accentuate the fact that the vaccine ought to be considered as a public good, and that its access should be universal. It should be for everyone, especially those who don't have access to it. So when we begin to see it a little bit like air, a little bit like food, a little bit like the essentials, that the goods of the earth, what he's really calling on us is to try and increase our generosity and be aware that we're all one part of a human family. He has his own wonderful way of doing that. He's very unique, he's a good communicator, and I believe that the world does listen to his voice. But I think there's always room for improvement, yes.
He's been very unequivocal in recent months on the role of the individual accepting the vaccination when offered. I think he's called it an ethical obligation and suggested that refusal of a COVID-19 vaccine might even be suicidal.
What I think the Holy See is pointing to in some recent documents of a moral nature, they're just pointing to the fact that it's a public good, and that we must try to promote that as much as possible to make sure that the dignity of every human being is respected and that a person can flourish. I think when the Holy See does this, it's always very sensitive to different points of view, it's very sensitive to ethical areas, but the work being carried out of that kind of analysis has been very much in depth, and I think the Holy See is, as I say, trying to promote that universal access.
Talking about Pope Francis and his work during this interview, understandably, he's in many ways a larger-than-life character for people who are Roman Catholic or just sort of follow world events. He has been a voice that a lot of people have found engaging in recent years. You have been able to work closely with him. What is he like as a person?
Well, as a person, I find him to be refreshing. I've said this a few times before, but one of the things I think young people, all people of all ages, that they like is authenticity. Authenticity where a person is very at ease with himself and their ideas and communicating. And Pope Francis is certainly that. He's passionate about the fact that we're all part of one family, that no matter the fact we have differences, we have different identities, he does want us to work together. He's very, very keen on that. And in his personality and in the way he is, his authenticity, I think, has a way of getting across. You know, what you see is what you get. And I've seen him in different settings, whether it's with a business leader, a political leader, a poor person that's coming to see him, a head of a local community. He's the same with everyone. He treats everyone in the same way, and it's a breath of fresh air. And
You must consider yourself quite fortunate to have been able to spend time close to him.
Yes, and I miss those days. You know, they were fun, because interpreting is a work where you just have to give your all and really be focused, and you almost cut out everything else. But one thing you don't miss is the image of the people who are in front of you. And it's a joy to work for him and to accompany him on all those trips. And also it's a very cheap way of seeing different cultures in different countries. Wonderful, wonderful. I won't name them, but all of them just been lovely. Yeah.
You received considerable praise for your interpretation work in 2015. I'm sure it wasn't the only moment, but I remember when the Pope visited the United States of America and met Barack Obama. What was it like? Did you feel that there were a lot of people who had become aware of your work?
I'm not sure. People were very kind, always very encouraging. I find that it's the kind of work that I don't want to be pious about it, but it got to a stage where the actual mechanics of it felt a little bit like a prayer very often, and that I didn't need to be fearful anymore, that, you know, on that level. And also on the other very human level, Pope Francis is a great communicator. So he keeps his sentences and phrases. He's very intellectual, he's very bright, but he makes sure that everyone should be able to understand the concept that he's trying to convey, which means that sentences sometimes are shorter, the concepts are more simple in their expression, and that makes work easier for an interpreter, I have to say. So,
but you have to have been extremely familiar with his prior words and the meaning that he wants to convey, to be able to choose.
You're right.
Similar words in a different language.
You're absolutely right. I don't mind telling you, at the beginning I was terrified, petrified, because I didn't have that access to know him, and but it took 2 or 3 times to occasions to really know that I was dealing with someone who, as I say, is very authentic, who doesn't jump from one area to another. You know pretty quickly where he's going, and the simplicity with which he wants to get an idea across. So it took me about 2 or 3 or 4 occasions to get some of his style. And once I had that, plus this aspect, as I say, that very often it felt like a prayer, especially when it was in front of lots of people, and I just kept it very simple. I just invoked the Holy Spirit, just a little prayer, and that took over. So I'd say those 2 things, but you are right, it took a little while. At the beginning, I think I must have made lots of mistakes from either English to Spanish or Spanish to English, but one of the things that I realized is, as long as I got the essence across, even in different words, he was also very humble and very kind. And I use that word encouraging a lot, but he's been incredibly encouraging. And after that early stage, then I realized this isn't so bad, maybe I can do this. And if it's not absolutely perfect, as long as he's happy and I'm not putting my foot in it, then that's the main thing.
So the Gibraltarian multilingual brain must have helped.
I think we don't realize, and it's not to be proud about it, but proud in a nice way, that we've got so many cultures. We don't realize, like when I first went to university, a friend of mine said there, you know, it's amazing, you're speaking to someone on the phone in Gibraltar, I was at Sussex University, and you move from Spanish into English, and even when it's a perfect English phrase, there's always a no at the end with a question mark. And I don't think we realize that that influence on us makes us probably more able to be sensitive to different nuances in different languages, and how to capture the essence quickly. Yeah, I think.
The role of permanent observer is, as I understand it, akin to that of a diplomat, and you were a permanent observer to the American states. What did that work entail, and are there sort of negotiations that you have to carry out on behalf of the Vatican?
Yes, the permanent observer's role is to be an ambassador of the Holy See and represent the Pope to the organization American States, which is an organization very old in that hemisphere, which promotes security, development. The pillars are fundamental, and the human rights, and there's many areas where the Holy See has a voice, and we're very often invited to speak at the organization, not just on the area of access to vaccines more recently, but for example migrants, the incredible migrant crisis that has affected people, for example coming out of Venezuela, the movements across the Americas. What can the organization do to promote solidarity and cooperation between countries and governments? And the Holy See adds her voice, the Church adds her voice, but we have to do it in a careful way, because we're observers to that organization, which means we're not a member state like all South America, the Caribbean, Canada, United States, and therefore we're invited in select areas to speak, and also behind the scenes to try and garner support for a given position, whether it's human rights. For example, a lot of time is spent at that organisation promoting the rights of women. It's the Secretary General of that organisation is always saying, you know, it'd be lovely to see a woman as Secretary General, more parity in the workplace. And the Holy See is involved in that. It tries to get into that conversation and to promote the dignity of human women. With the question of the integral human development, the Church has a very particular view, which is that development must flourish on all levels in terms of work, in the home, in the family, but also allow room for the spiritual level, the transcendental dimension, to have that aperture to God and to have that defended. So therefore, when we talk about religious freedom, we don't look at it as something that's imposing, but rather contribution to the dialogue and to what can promote the common good in society. Like we have freedom of rights in so many areas, also religious freedom, we believe, strengthens a society, strengthens a common good. And that's why the choice sometimes for the Holy See at these organisations is to speak about different rights in different areas. So we promote the dignity of human right at all stages of human life, and we do that, I hope, with a passion, with respect for other views, but I would say that there's many opportunities to do that, and we're listened to, and sometimes I'm with someone who may have an opposing view, but we sit down and we say, okay, we don't agree on this, but what could we do together that might benefit this sector of society? And sometimes conversations to do with vaccines, the elderly, there's a lot of room for work and attainment. Yeah.
Argentina is a member state, obviously, of this organization, the country of Pope Francis's birth, a predominantly Catholic country. Is that work that you have been involved with in your role? As
an observer, permanent observer, we don't directly get involved in those conversations, as I said earlier, because we're not a member state. We don't have a right to even vote on a resolution as such, when a resolution is passed or not. But what we do, and all countries, including the one you've mentioned, have an incredible respect for when the Holy See adds her voice to that conversation. I think part of a democratic society, and indeed an organisation, is that the Holy See, any other organisation, can be free to contribute her voice, her perspective, to the way it sees that issue. And I would just say that the Church's position to promote and defend the sanctity of human life at all stages, right from the beginning, right to the end, is something that is listened to, and there's very many different ways that we communicate that and enter into a conversation. But I should stress that one of the things the Church is never wanting to do is to force a conscience, to force a point of view. What it does is contribute, remind, and try to inspire an interest of a person towards truth, to what we consider to be the truth, in this case a respect for the sanctity of life at all its stages. And the organisation, as I say, there are many occasions where I've been able to speak about this and other issues, but in a climate of great respect. I think that's fundamental. Yeah.
You mentioned women in your previous answer, and I'm reminded that the Pope formalized women's role within the Catholic Church, but the priesthood remains out of reach.
Yes.
What would you say to perhaps a young girl who hears and is inspired by a sermon, but is told, well, that's not something that you'll be able to do when you're older? What would you say to her?
It's an interesting way you put the question, Jonathan. It would be difficult, and it's always difficult to pastorally provide a satisfactory answer, but I think there's no way around it that the good Lord himself chose men to be priests, and some afterwards have said, well, that was the cultural day then. But what I would say is that there are many things that Jesus said which were extremely difficult and go beyond cultural considerations at the time. For example, the Eucharist and the way he expressed how the Eucharist was his real body and blood. So for Catholics, sometimes the challenge is the way we communicate, the way we speak, and the way we show respect. And I think the Holy Father himself has shown an incredible amount of respect for the dignity of women, all the popes, but this pope in particular, recently he's trying, we were talking about parity in the workplace, and he's trying to get more women basically into high positions of authority in the Vatican. And he's done that recently. A secretary for one of the congregations is a religious consecrated woman, and she actually has, if I'm not mistaken, she has the power of vote in a particular consultative process, which is quite something. And the Pope's constantly looking for ways that we can promote women. So to that young girl, I would say, feel part of the Church and feel just as important as any human being in the world, but also in the Church. And the fact that our Lord did make this choice doesn't mean that a man has more dignity than a woman. It's something to do with the way those choices were made many, many years ago, but I don't believe it denigrates from the dignity of femininity at all. And if there's anything I've seen in that organization, it's just how much time is given to promote the dignity of women and their place and their importance in society.
Put this priesthood question to one side, what would the Church say about equality between the sexes?
Well, very simply that every human being is created in the image and likeness of God, and there's no distinction in that dignity at all whatsoever. The fact that there can be different functions in the Church, that different responsibilities, is actually secondary to that primary fundamental dignity, and there mustn't be any distinction whatsoever. And the Church has different ways to do that. I spent a lot of time thinking how I can speak sometimes at the organization, and I used to turn up at all the events when women were organizing things, and they were always pleased that the Holy See was there. They say it's very important for the Church to be present and be present in the conversation, and to how to promote the place of the woman in society, because many women in South America have incredibly difficult lives in COVID because they were mothers of the family, they had jobs, they weren't able to get out. And so one of the things the organization did was to make sure that women were not left behind in looking at the question of COVID and how it affected everyone, and to heighten awareness of governments within the organization, how to protect women precisely in that, so that not demean it in any way. Yeah.